Clara Hayes woke to the faint hum of city traffic and the sting of sunlight pressing through wide-open curtains, her mind foggy until the scent of sandalwood and leather filled her nose, and she realized instantly this was not her bed, not her apartment, not her life. The sheets were too smooth, the mattress too soft, the air too foreign. Her eyes darted to the suit jacket, perfectly draped over a chair, to the expensive wristwatch gleaming on the nightstand, to the faint echo of footsteps somewhere in the distance. A wave of panic shot through her body as memories of last night rushed back. In fragments, the company party champagne flowing faster than her nerves could handle. Laughter that felt borrowed a hand, steadying her when she almost stumbled, a deep voice that both terrified and steadied her. Nathaniel Cross. Even whispering his name in her head felt like trespassing on forbidden ground. He was the man who built empires from ashes, the ruthless CEO, whose presence dominated boardrooms and newspapers, the man her colleagues called untouchable. And now she was in his room. Clara's pulse hammered against her ribs as she sat up abruptly, pulling the sheet to her chest, scanning the luxurious apartment high above the city skyline. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls revealed the endless sweep of skyscrapers glittering in morning light, yet all she could think about was escape. She spotted her shoes and purse discarded carelessly near the door, shame flushing her cheeks at the careless evidence of what had happened. Her reflection in the mirror only deepened the horror. Mascara smeared beneath hazel eyes, auburn hair tangled the outline of last night's regret etched across her face. She bent to snatch her blouse from the carpet, fumbling with the buttons in a panic that made her fingers clumsy, each second ticking like a drumbeat of dread. The door to the adjoining room clicked faintly, and Clara froze heart thundering so hard she thought it might give her away. Footsteps moved across the hardwood, steady and unhurried, coming closer. She held her breath, expecting him to appear, expecting those gray eyes that silenced entire meetings to cut into her, but instead the sound drifted away. A door shut softly, and silence wrapped the space again. Relief burst from her lungs as she darted to the doorway, slipping her feet into her shoes, clutching her purse like a lifeline. She bolted, closing the door behind her, as if she could shut away the entire memory. The elevator ride was suffocating. She hugged her purse to her chest, eyes fixed on the glowing numbers as they crawled downward. What if someone saw her leave? What if the doorman asked questions? What if whispers reached the office by noon? Shame scorched her skin hotter than the sunlight. She was not careless, not reckless, not this. She had worked too hard to carve a place in Cross Enterprises, too hard to be reduced to gossip about a woman who stumbled into the CEO's bed. By the time she pushed through the lobby and out onto the street, the city's sharp air did little to steady her racing breath. She hailed a cab, slid into the back seat, and pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. Mistake, she whispered to herself silently, just one mistake. She would bury it, cut it out, erase it. The only way forward was to resign before it consumed her life. That decision was the only anchor keeping her from shattering. Hours later, Clara walked through the towering glass doors of Cross Enterprises, her heels clicking with forced confidence, though her insides trembled. In her hand was an envelope, the resignation letter she had typed at dawn. She greeted colleagues with a faint smile, praying none could see through to the turmoil beneath her professional mask. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than usual, each second dragging her closer to the one man she could not face. As she stepped into her office, her eyes betrayed her drawn immediately to the glass wall opposite hers. Nathaniel sat behind his desk, immaculate in a charcoal suit posture, composed eyes fixed on a document, as though the world revolved only around the words in front of him. The sight of him so controlled, so untouchable, twisted something sharp in her chest. She sank into her chair, set the envelope on the desk, then slid it quickly into a drawer, as though hiding contraband. She could not hand it in today, not while his presence pressed against her from across the glass. She looked up once more, and their eyes met a collision she had not prepared for. For a moment his expression softened, something flickered that was not cold calculation, but something more dangerous, something that made her heart stumble. Clara snapped her gaze away, shutting the drawer firmly over her resignation. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow she would give it to him. But even as she whispered the promise in the silence of her office, she knew tomorrow would come, and fear would still chain her to the same seat, the same secret, the same man whose eyes had already begun to unravel her defenses. Clara arrived the next morning with her resignation letter neatly folded in her bag, her resolve firm yet fragile like glass that could shatter with the slightest touch. She rehearsed her words in the elevator, the practiced speech about needing time for family obligations, about wanting to pursue other opportunities. But when the doors opened onto the executive floor, and she caught sight of Nathaniel Cross striding through the hall, surrounded by assistants and department heads, the words evaporated. He walked with the authority of a man who knew the world bent to his will. Each step measured his gaze sharp and his presence enough to hush conversations as he passed. Clara ducked into her office, her heart pounding as if she had committed a crime simply by looking at him. She had promised herself yesterday that today would be the day she freed herself from this invisible cage. Yet the envelope stayed sealed in her bag untouched. The hours blurred as she tried to bury herself in spreadsheets and reports, but the universe refused to grant her invisibility. At noon, her phone buzzed with a meeting request from Nathaniel himself. Her stomach dropped. He rarely summoned lower-level analysts directly. Still, she gathered her files and made her way into the lion's den. His office was as intimidating as the man himself, all glass and steel, with the city sprawling endlessly beyond him. He motioned for her to sit without lifting his eyes from the document in front of him. She sat clutching her folder like a shield. At last he looked up, gray eyes locking on her in a way that made the air thin. "You filed a resignation," he said calmly. His voice, steady, measured a statement rather than a question. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "Yes, sir." He cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "Denied." Her mouth fell open. "Denied, but you are still needed. The renewable energy proposal, the projections. You have the data no one else has organized. Until that is finished, you stay." His words were ironclad, not angry, but absolute, as if the decision had already been carved into stone. She wanted to argue, to tell him that her personal life, her sanity demanded an exit, but the weight of his stare pinned her in place. When she finally nodded, it felt like surrender. The rumors began soon after. A whispered conversation in the break room fell silent when she entered. Colleagues exchanged knowing glances. She heard her name paired with his in a tone dripping with suggestion. Clara kept her head down, burying herself in numbers, but the judgment pressed in like smoke filling her lungs. She wanted to scream that nothing had happened, that the truth was nothing but a mistake. But her silence only deepened suspicion. One afternoon, as she struggled to balance stacks of reports, a senior analyst deliberately bumped into her, sending pages scattering across the polished floor. "Careful," the woman sneered softly. "Wouldn't want the boss's favorite to look clumsy." Clara's throat tightened as she bent to gather the papers, her face burning. But before she could reply, Nathaniel's shadow loomed. He crouched, picked up the top sheet, and placed it back in Clara's hands with calm precision. His gaze flicked to the analyst, cold and sharp. "Focus on your own work," he said quietly, but firmly before striding away. The entire office seemed to hold its breath. Clara's heart twisted. He had defended her, yet, in doing so, only fueled the whispers. That night she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the resignation letter once again, the paper smudged from being folded and unfolded too many times. She could not keep living like this, yet each attempt to leave was blocked by him. She began to wonder if he did it on purpose, if he knew how trapped she felt. The following week she tried again. This time she left the letter directly on his desk before he arrived, hoping he would read it, without giving her the chance to lose her courage. By mid-morning, the letter was back, in her office inbox, stamped with a single word in his strong handwriting: denied. Clara's frustration boiled over. She stormed into his office, pulse racing. "You cannot keep me here against my will." She snapped, her voice trembling but fierce. Nathaniel looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "You think you can just walk away from responsibility because of fear?" The word cut her like glass. "I am not afraid," she lied. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "Then prove it. Finish the project. Show me you are more than what they whisper." She stared at him, confused, angry, yet unable to look away. Something in his eyes told her he saw more than she wanted revealed, as if he could read the turmoil she tried to bury. She turned on her heel and left without another word, but his voice followed her, low and certain. "You belong here more than you know." Clara slammed the door behind her, her chest aching. Belonging was the last thing she felt. Every day became a battle. She delivered flawless reports, stayed late, ignored the gossip, but inside she withered. Each morning she rehearsed new reasons to quit. Each evening she failed again. The invisible thread binding her to Nathaniel only grew tighter. Sometimes she caught him watching her through the glass wall, his expression unreadable. Sometimes he spoke to her with a tone that brushed the edge of personal, before retreating again behind the mask of CEO. She could not understand why he held her there, why he refused her escape. The tension in the office became unbearable, a storm building with no release. And Clara knew deep down that this was only the beginning. When Clara left the office that evening, the city lights were just beginning to bloom against the twilight sky. But her mind was already heavy with the dread of returning home. She lived not in the sleek high-rises of downtown, but in a modest apartment on the edge of Queens, a place that had once belonged to her father before his passing. It should have been a sanctuary, a piece of stability in her chaotic world, but instead it had become another battlefield. The moment she stepped through the door, she was greeted by the sharp voice of her stepmother, Diane. "Clara, the bills are stacked on the table," Diane said without even a hello. She sat in her robe, on the worn sofa sipping wine, while scrolling through her phone, the television flickering in the background. Beside her, Clara's younger half-brother Ethan lounged with a video game controller in hand, the sound effects blaring without concern for the tension in the room. Clara dropped her purse onto the counter, her exhaustion palpable. "I just walked in, Diane. Can we not do this right now?" Diane set her phone down with exaggerated care. "Not do this? The bank called again. If we do not pay at least part of the balance, they will start foreclosure proceedings on this place." "Do you want to be on the street?" Clara's chest tightened. She knew the house was under her name, inherited from her father, but Diane had run up credit card debt. In Clara's absence, debts now entangled with the mortgage because of Diane's manipulations. Clara had tried to keep up with payments, funneling every extra dollar from her paycheck into the black hole Diane created, but the weight of it never lessened. "I am doing everything I can," Clara whispered, though her voice cracked. Ethan snorted from the couch without looking up. "Maybe if you stop pretending to be some saint at work and actually use what you have." "People talk, Clara. Everyone knows the boss has his eyes on you. Why not take advantage for once?" The words struck like a slap. Clara's fists clenched, heat burning her face. "That is not who I am." Diane leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Who you are is someone who lets her family drown because of pride. You have a rich man's attention, Clara. Do not be stupid. Secure something from it before he moves on." Clara felt sick. She grabbed the stack of bills, flipping through pages filled with red notices and overdue warnings. Her salary was respectable, but it was no match for the bottomless pit Diane had created. Still, she refused to let Nathaniel become the answer. It would mean surrendering the last shred of independence she had left. "I will handle it," Clara said firmly. "Just stop expecting me to sell myself to fix your mistakes." Diane's laughter was sharp, bitter. "Handle it. You can barely keep up with the minimum payments. Do not pretend you are stronger than you are, Clara. You are already one step away from falling apart." Clara retreated to her room, slamming the door, tears stinging her eyes. She sat on the bed, surrounded by the bills, her mind spinning. She wanted to scream at her father for leaving her with this woman, scream at herself for not leaving sooner, scream at the world for always forcing her to choose between dignity and survival. That night, she stayed awake long after. The apartment had gone quiet, scribbling numbers on scrap paper, desperate calculations that never added up. Her only option was to work harder, save more, and pray Diane did not destroy everything first. The next morning, Clara arrived at work pale and worn. She poured herself into the project, determined to prove she was not defined by gossip or debt. But Nathaniel noticed. He always seemed to notice. That evening, as she was leaving, he stopped her by the elevator. "You look tired," he said simply, his voice low, not as her boss, but as something else, something more personal. Clara forced a smile. "Just a long week." He studied her for a moment, as if reading the truth she tried to conceal, then let her go without pressing. She was grateful and unsettled all at once. Weeks passed in a blur of tension, both at home and in the office. Diane's demands grew louder, Ethan's sneers sharper. One evening, Clara came home to find Diane sitting with a banker at the kitchen table, papers spread out like weapons. "We are restructuring the mortgage," Diane announced with a smug smile. Clara's heart froze. "Under whose authority?" "Yours," Diane replied smoothly. "You will sign. The banker already prepared the documents. It is the only way to delay foreclosure." Clara read the papers, her stomach sinking. Signing them meant tying herself to even more debt. She had not created debt that would anchor her forever. She shook her head. No, I am not signing this. Diane's face twisted in fury. Then you will be the reason we lose the only roof over our heads. Do you want that guilt? Ethan chimed in. Sneering, guess your big shot boss is not as interested as people think. Otherwise you would not be crying over bills. Clara stormed out, unable to breathe, in that suffocating apartment. She walked for hours, the city's neon lights blurring with her tears. She ended up outside the Cross Enterprises tower, staring up at the gleaming windows that housed her tormentor and savior both. She hated that part of her, longed to step inside, to collapse and admit she needed help. But she would not. She could not. The next day, Nathaniel called her into his office. He handed her a file, nothing unusual at first, until she opened it and realized what it was. It was her mortgage statement, her debt history, the foreclosure warnings. Clara's breath caught. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. Nathaniel's expression was unreadable. "I have access to financial records through the corporate banking network. I did not intend to pry, but when I saw your name connected to overdue accounts, I looked closer." Clara's face burned with humiliation. "You had no right." He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You are drowning, Clara. I am not going to let you sink." Her throat tightened, anger and shame, colliding with something softer, more dangerous. "I will handle it myself," she whispered, clutching the file to her chest. His voice was quiet but resolute. "You should not have to handle it alone." She fled his office before he could say more, her pulse racing. At home, Diane pounced the moment she walked in. "Did he offer to help? Tell me he did. Tell me you finally realized what you have." Clara stared at her stepmother with new clarity, seeing at last the greed and manipulation in every line of her face. "This is not about saving the house," Clara said. "This is about using me as a bargaining chip. I will not let you." Diane's eyes narrowed, her smile cruel. "Then you will regret it." Clara locked herself in her room, heart pounding. For the first time, she began to fear, not just for her financial stability, but for her safety in the very home she lived in. The family she had tried to hold together was unraveling fast, and Nathaniel's quiet promise that she should not face it alone echoed in her mind long into the night. Clara's attempts to separate her private turmoil from her professional life became increasingly impossible as the weeks pressed on. Each morning she carried the weight of overdue bills and the venomous words of Diane and Ethan on her shoulders, only to step into the polished world of Cross Enterprises, where Nathaniel's eyes seemed to follow her every move. She tried to ignore it, to bury herself in work, but the harder she pushed him away, the closer fate seemed to draw him. One evening she attended a gala hosted by the company at a grand hotel in Midtown, a gathering filled with investors, board members, and the glittering elite of the city. Clara had begged to be excused, but her manager insisted every team member attend. She wore a simple black dress, modest compared to the sequined gowns around her, and clutched her glass of sparkling water like a shield. The room buzzed with laughter and business deals disguised as small talk. Clara kept to the edges, wishing herself invisible, until she felt the unmistakable presence of Nathaniel entering the ballroom. Conversations hushed as he arrived impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, every line of his posture exuding power. Clara ducked her head, praying he would not notice her. But when their eyes met across the crowded room, she knew the prayer was useless. Hours later, as she tried to slip out, Nathaniel intercepted her near the exit. His gaze dropped to the delicate bracelet on her wrist, a silver band with a small charm shaped like a bird in flight. Clara froze when she saw his expression, change, the controlled mask slipping for just a heartbeat. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly. Clara touched the bracelet nervously. "It was a gift from my father years ago." Why Nathaniel's jaw tightened. His mind flashed back to a night almost 2 decades earlier, when a teenage girl had pulled him from the wreckage of his crashed car, her small wrist bearing that same bracelet as she guided him to safety before disappearing into the chaos of flashing lights. He had never forgotten her had spent years searching for the girl who saved him. Now standing in front of him, Clara wore the same piece of jewelry, and he felt the world tilt. Clara misread his silence. She thought he had recognized it as evidence of something else proof tying her to the secret night they shared. Panic rushed through her veins. "Do not look at me like that," she said sharply. "Whatever you think you know, you are wrong." She tried to brush past him, but his hand lightly touched her arm, not restraining, only grounding. "Clara," he said, his voice low and steady, "this is not about last night. This is about something more." She pulled away, shaken. To her, the words felt like a trap. Another layer of suspicion from a man who had already denied her escape too many times. She fled the gala and disappeared into the city streets, heart-pounding, as though she were being hunted. The following days at the office were suffocating. Nathaniel watched her with new intensity, his questions sharper, his presence heavier. Clara avoided him, but rumors of their connection thickened. Every denial of her resignation now felt to her like an admission that he held something over her. She began to wonder if he was investigating her, if he had uncovered her financial struggles, her family's chaos. Each time he called her into his office, her stomach knotted with dread. One afternoon, she found herself face to face with him once more. He gestured to a chair, and she sat reluctantly, arms crossed. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke softly. "Why do you keep running from me?" Clara's laugh was bitter. "Because you will not let me go. Every time I try, you block me. You think you own me because of one mistake, but you do not." His eyes flashed hurt, flickering behind the steel. "It was not a mistake for me." Clara stiffened, her throat dry. She shook her head and stood quickly, unable to respond. "Do not say things like that," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I cannot handle more lies." She walked out, leaving him staring after her, his chest tight with the weight of truths he could not yet reveal. Meanwhile, at home, Diane's schemes escalated. Clara came home one evening to find an eviction notice taped to the door. Panic gripped her until she realized Diane had staged it, a cruel ploy to frighten her into caving. "This is real," Diane insisted when confronted. "If you do not do something soon, we will lose everything." Clara shoved the notice back into her hands. "You will lose everything, Diane. I already lost my peace the day you stepped into this house." Diane's smile was cold. "Then maybe it is time you ask your boss for more than a paycheck." The manipulation cut deeper than ever, fueling Clara's desperation to escape both home and work. But Nathaniel's suspicions only grew. One evening, as Clara worked late, she found him standing by the window of her office, gazing out at the skyline. He turned when she entered his eyes, catching the bracelet again. "You saved me once," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I owe you more than you know." Clara blinked, confused and unnerved. "What are you talking about?" But he shook his head, retreating back into silence. That night she lay awake, torn between fear and a strange pull she could not explain. Nathaniel Cross was not just her boss or the man tied to her secret shame. He seemed to know pieces of her life she herself had long buried, and that terrified her. By the end of the week, Clara could no longer tell if she was running from the rumors from her family or from the truth that Nathaniel might hold the key to everything she had tried to forget. Every denied resignation letter now felt like proof of a destiny she had not chosen, and deep inside, despite every effort to resist, she began to fear she no longer had the power to walk away. The tension between Clara and Nathaniel reached its peak the week she was assigned to travel with him for a high-stakes client meeting in San Francisco. She had begged her manager to send someone else, but the request was dismissed with a smile. "You are the only one who has mastered the data models. Mr. Cross specifically asked for you." Clara's stomach dropped when she heard that. The trip was scheduled for 2 days, yet the idea of being in Nathaniel's orbit without the buffer of an office full of people made her feel trapped. On the day of departure, she boarded the private jet with her laptop clutched tightly, determined to bury herself in work to avoid conversation. Nathaniel was already seated, reading documents, his posture composed. He glanced up briefly when she entered, offered a small nod, then returned to his papers. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words, yet strangely she felt his awareness of her in every breath. The meeting in San Francisco went smoothly. Clara presented the projections, clearly impressing the clients, while Nathaniel's commanding presence sealed the deal. Yet as the evening fell, complications arose. The hotel informed them that due to a booking error and a local tech conference filling every room, only one suite was available. Clara's face drained of color when the receptionist explained, but Nathaniel simply took the keycard with a nod. "We will manage," he said. Clara wanted to protest, but there was no solution. When they entered the suite, Clara immediately scanned the room. It was spacious with a separate sitting area and a single large bed dominating the space. "I will sleep on the couch," she blurted, setting her bag down. Nathaniel arched an eyebrow but did not argue. "Suit yourself." The hours stretched awkwardly. Clara worked at the desk, her fingers trembling slightly on the keyboard, while Nathaniel reviewed files on the couch that would be her bed later. The silence was thick until Clara sneezed, her nose stuffy. Nathaniel looked up sharply. "You are ill?" She shook her head quickly. "Just tired." But as the night wore on, her fever revealed itself. Her skin grew clammy, her body weak. At some point, her head dropped onto the desk, eyes closing without her permission. She woke to the sensation of a cool cloth on her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open to find Nathaniel beside her, his hand steady, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You should have said something," he murmured. Embarrassment and gratitude flooded her simultaneously. "I did not want to cause trouble." His eyes lingered on her for a moment too long before he looked away. "You never cause trouble, Clara. You just do not let anyone help you." The words pierced her defenses. She turned her face aside, afraid he would see the tears threatening to escape. He guided her to the bed, despite her weak protests, placing the blanket over her and settling in the chair beside her as if he had no intention of leaving. She tried to argue to tell him she would be fine, but the exhaustion pulled her under. Hours later, she stirred awake in the dim light of dawn. Nathaniel was still there, asleep in the chair, his head tilted, his expression unguarded. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the armor of CEO, the man who looked weary and almost vulnerable. Her heart twisted painfully. She told herself it meant nothing, that it was only compassion, but deep down she felt the dangerous warmth of something more. The second day passed in a blur of meetings. Clara pushed herself to perform, though her body ached with fatigue. Nathaniel's gaze followed her closely, a silent guardian she could neither accept nor escape. On the flight home, as she drifted into uneasy sleep, she felt the faint brush of a blanket being pulled over her shoulders. When she opened her eyes briefly, he was beside her, pretending to be immersed in his laptop, though his hand lingered near hers on the armrest. She closed her eyes quickly, her chest tight with confusion. Back in New York, Clara told herself she would put the trip behind her. Yet the memory of Nathaniel's care clung to her like a shadow. Each time she tried to harden her heart, she recalled the cool cloth on her forehead, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. It terrified her because she could not afford to believe in him. Not when her world at home was crumbling and her pride demanded independence. That night alone in her apartment, she whispered to herself that she had to leave before the line between duty and desire blurred any further. She promised again that she would resign, even if he tore the letter in half before her eyes. Because if she stayed, she feared she would lose more than her job. She would lose the walls she had built, and with them the fragile control she had left over her own heart. The days following the San Francisco trip unfolded with an unfamiliar heaviness for Clara. She tried to return to her routine, pouring herself into work, but her mind kept circling back to the image of Nathaniel asleep in that chair beside her bed, to the memory of his voice, low and tender, as he said she never let anyone help her. She hated herself for replaying it, for feeling warmth where she should feel only alarm. At home, the situation worsened. Diane cornered her one evening, waving a document in her face, her voice shrill with desperation. "Sign this, Clara. It transfers the deed of the house so I can get a cash advance from a lender. It is the only way we keep the lights on." Clara's stomach twisted as she scanned the page. "This is not keeping the lights on. This is selling the last piece of my father for your gambling debts." Diane's eyes gleamed with venom. "Do not you dare put this on me. You are the one clinging to pride while your family drowns." Ethan smirked from the couch, adding fuel. "Maybe if you finally admit you are his mistress, he will buy us a mansion and you can stop pretending you are better than us." Clara's hands shook with fury. She tore the paper in half and stormed into her room, slamming the door. That night she cried quietly into her pillow, clutching the bracelet her father had given her years ago, the same one that had caught Nathaniel's attention. She told herself she would not break, no matter how Diane twisted the knife. At work the following morning, she found another envelope on her desk. She opened it hesitantly and froze. Inside was a photocopy of an old hospital report, dated nearly 2 decades earlier, listing a teenage boy named Nathaniel Cross admitted after a car accident. At the bottom was a handwritten note, witness identified, young girl auburn hair bracelet with bird charm. Clara's blood ran cold. She turned and saw Nathaniel standing in his office across the glass wall. His gaze locked on her, not cold, not calculating, but filled with something deeper. She rushed into his office without knocking, slamming the report on his desk. "Why do you have this? How long have you been digging into me?" He looked up at her, calm yet pained. "I did not dig. I remembered. You saved me that night, Clara. You pulled me from the wreck before the car caught fire. I was barely conscious, but I never forgot the bracelet. When I saw it at the gala, I knew." Clara staggered back, her mind reeling. "That was years ago. I was just a kid. I did what anyone would have done." Nathaniel shook his head firmly. "No one else stopped. Dozens of cars passed before you. You changed my life, Clara. I have spent years wondering who you were, and now here you are." Clara's chest constricted with conflicting emotions. Gratitude, disbelief, anger, and a dangerous swell of something softer. "So what then? You keep me here out of guilt, out of obligation." His eyes searched hers. "No, I keep you here because I cannot let go of the one person who reminded me what it meant to be human." The confession stole the air from the room. Clara spun away, terrified by the intensity of his words. She whispered hoarsely, "You are wrong about me. I am not that girl anymore. I cannot be what you think I am." She fled his office before he could answer. That night, Diane's fury reached new heights. Clara walked in to find her stepmother screaming into the phone, slamming it down when she saw her. "You think you are so noble refusing to sign. Well, now the bank will take the house. Are you happy?" Clara dropped her bag, exhausted. "You brought this on yourself, Diane." Diane's expression twisted. "Do not you dare stand there and act righteous when you are the reason I am losing everything. If you just opened your mouth and asked your rich boss for help, we would not be in this mess." Clara turned to retreat to her room, but Diane blocked the hallway. "You will regret this," she hissed. "Mark my words." The threat chilled Clara more than she cared to admit. Days later, she discovered the mortgage had been bought out. Confused and alarmed, she confronted the bank. The representative confirmed that the debt had been settled through a third-party account linked to Cross Enterprises. Clara's stomach dropped. She marched into Nathaniel's office, slamming the confirmation papers on his desk. "You had no right," she snapped. "That was my fight." Nathaniel rose slowly, his expression steady. "It was not a fight you could win alone. I would not stand by and watch you be crushed by her greed." Clara's voice cracked with anger. "Do you not see what you have done? You made me exactly what they accuse me of. Now everyone will think I traded myself for your money." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, regret flickering across his features. "I never wanted to make you feel owned. I only wanted you safe." Clara's eyes blurred with tears. "Safe is not worth it if it costs me my dignity." She turned and walked out, leaving him standing in the silence of his own power, torn between the instinct to protect her and the realization that his protection might destroy the very strength he admired in her. That night, Clara sat on her bed, surrounded by bills she no longer owed, yet felt like shackles all the same. She hated Diane for pushing her into this corner, hated Nathaniel for stepping in without asking, hated herself most for the part of her heart that ached at his words. When Ethan knocked on her door to gloat, holding a box of new sneakers bought with money, she knew Diane had somehow wrangled. She realized nothing she did would ever change the cycle. She had to break free, even if it meant severing every tie, even if it meant walking away from Nathaniel too. But as she stared at her bracelet under the dim light, she could not shake the echo of his voice, telling her she had saved him long before she ever realized what he meant to him. And for the first time, Clara feared that her past and her present were on a collision course she could no longer avoid. The fracture lines in Clara's world widened until they threatened to swallow her whole. At home, Diane's bitterness had sharpened into outright hostility after losing the house to Nathaniel's intervention. And at work, the gossip grew louder, every whisper, a knife reminding Clara of the debt she could not deny. She tried to keep her head down, but the weight of judgment from every side was suffocating. One night, Clara returned home to find the apartment eerily quiet. Diane was waiting in the kitchen, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. "Pack your things," she said coolly. Clara blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" Diane slid a piece of paper across the counter. It was a termination notice of tenancy. "This place is mine now. You do not belong here anymore." Clara's voice shook. "You cannot do this. My name is still Diane," cut her off with a bitter smile. "Do not fool yourself. You lost everything the moment you let that man buy your debts. You may think you are free, but you are just his possession now. And if you think he will protect you forever, you are more naive than I thought." Clara left that night with nothing but a small suitcase. The rest of her belongings still inside the apartment she no longer recognized as home. She booked a cheap motel near the office, telling herself it was only temporary, that she would rebuild from scratch. But deep inside, she knew Diane was not finished with her. A week later, the storm hit. Clara received a call late one evening as she worked overtime in the office. The voice on the other end was low and male. "If you want to see your family safe, you will come alone. Tonight." Her blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" The line clicked dead. She tried to call back, but the number was blocked. Fear clawed at her chest. She dialed Diane's number and got no answer. She dialed Ethan's, and it went straight to voicemail. Her hands shook as she grabbed her coat and rushed into the night. The address she had been given led her to the industrial outskirts of the city, to an abandoned warehouse surrounded by broken fences and flickering lights. She stepped inside, the echo of her footsteps magnified in the cavernous space. A shadow moved, and Diane emerged from the darkness, her face pale but her eyes glittering with malice. Finally, Diane sneered. "I thought you might disappoint me again." Clara's throat tightened. "What is going on? Why are we here?" A man stepped out behind Diane, tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile that sent a chill through Clara's bones. She recognized him from business journals as Marcus Hale, a ruthless competitor who had once tried and failed to take over Cross Enterprises. "You see, Diane purred, some debts can only be paid with leverage. And you, my dear, are the perfect leverage." Clara stumbled back, horror dawning. "You traded me." Diane's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Traded, sold, call it what you like. You are the only currency valuable enough to bring him down." Marcus advanced his tone, mocking. "Cross will come running the moment he knows you are here. And when he does, his empire falls." Clara's heart hammered. She wanted to scream, to fight, but rough hands seized her from behind, binding her wrists with coarse rope. She struggled, tears of fury burning her eyes. Diane only watched, arms crossed her expression, devoid of regret. Hours passed like lifetimes until headlights cut across the warehouse. A black car pulled up outside, and Nathaniel's tall frame appeared in the doorway. His presence filled the space like a storm. His eyes locked on Clara, bound to the chair, her face pale, her wrists raw, from struggling, and something primal ignited in him. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice low but deadly. Marcus laughed. "Always so composed, Cross. Let us see how composed you are when everything you built crumbles." Nathaniel stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You want me, not her. Release her, and I will hear your terms." Clara shook her head frantically. "Do not." Marcus silenced her with a gesture. "You think you can bargain from a place of weakness. I could end her life right here and watch you break." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He took another step closer, his voice steady. "You underestimate me, Hale. I built my empire from ashes once. I will do it again. But if you harm her, you will not live to see the fallout." For a moment, the warehouse vibrated with silence, tension strung tighter than steel. Then Marcus lunged, dragging Clara to her feet, a knife flashing at her throat. She gasped, her body trembling as the blade pressed against her skin. Nathaniel's composure cracked, his voice raw. "Clara, I loved you long before that night. You have been in my life much longer than you realize. I cannot lose you again." The words shattered her. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, not from the knife, but from the truth in his voice. Her mind raced back to the accident. She had nearly forgotten the boy she had pulled from the flames, the eyes that had haunted her without name. Nathaniel took another step, his hands raised, his gaze locked on hers. "Trust me," he whispered. In that split second, Clara shifted her weight, slamming her heel down on Marcus's foot. He cried out, loosening his grip just enough. Nathaniel surged forward, tackling him to the ground. The knife clattered across the floor as chaos erupted. Clara scrambled back, her wrists burning as she fought against the rope. Nathaniel landed blow after blow, years of restrained fury unleashed. Marcus spat blood, cursing, but Nathaniel's strength was unrelenting. When the police burst through the doors, tipped off by Nathaniel's silent call, before entering, Marcus was already subdued. Diane was dragged away screaming, her voice filled with curses that echoed through the warehouse. Clara collapsed into Nathaniel's arms, her body shaking violently. He held her against his chest, his voice trembling with relief. "You are safe now. I swear I will never let anyone hurt you again." She clung to him, sobbing, her heart breaking and healing all at once. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe his words. For the first time, she felt that maybe she did not have to carry the weight alone. Clara woke to the steady rhythm of machines and the sterile scent of antiseptic, her eyes blinking against the harsh hospital lights, until the room slowly came into focus. For a moment, disorientation clouded her, the memories of the warehouse, the knife, the terror, all colliding with the present. Then she felt the warmth of a hand wrapped around hers. Turning her head, she saw Nathaniel seated beside her bed. His posture weary, his suit rumpled, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that softened the moment she stirred. Relief washed over his face. "You are awake," he whispered, as though afraid louder words might shatter the fragile peace. Clara's throat ached, her voice barely audible. "How long have I been here? 2 days, he answered gently. "The shock and exhaustion caught up with you. But you are safe now. Marcus is in custody. Diane will face charges for her part in it. You do not have to look over your shoulder anymore." The words should have brought comfort, but Clara's chest tightened with a different ache. "Why, Nathaniel?" Why would you risk everything for me?" He leaned closer, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed the storm within. "Because losing you was never an option. Not after everything you have already been to me." She shook her head, confusion and pain colliding. "You keep saying that, but I do not understand." Nathaniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He placed it gently on the blanket. It was a snapshot taken years ago by a bystander after his car accident blurred and chaotic. But in the corner was a young girl with auburn hair, her wrist adorned with the very same bird charm bracelet Clara now wore. Her breath caught. "That night," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "I was 19, reckless, and thought I was invincible. My car flipped and caught fire. People passed by, but no one stopped, except you. You were barely more than a child, but you pulled me out, stayed until the ambulance came, and disappeared before I could even thank you. I swore I would find you someday. I did not know it was you until I saw the bracelet at the gala." Clara pressed her hand over her mouth, emotion flooding her. The memory had lived in her mind like a dream, a blur of flames and fear, but she had buried it. She had never imagined the boy she saved was the same man now sitting beside her, the man who had held such power over her life. Tears filled her eyes. "All this time I thought you kept me here because of that night. The secret night." His gaze softened further. "That night changed things, yes, but not in the way you think. I already loved you before then, Clara. I just did not have the chance to tell you. Finding you again was not an accident. It was fate giving me a second chance." Her tears spilled freely now, her body trembling as she absorbed the weight of his words. "But you do not know me, not really. You only see what you want to see." He shook his head firmly, squeezing her hand. "I see a woman who has carried burdens that were never hers to carry. I see someone who stood tall, even when her family dragged her down. I see the girl who saved me from the fire, and the woman who saved me from becoming the kind of man with no heart left. I know more about you than you think." Clara broke then, the walls she had built around her heart, crumbling under the sincerity in his eyes. She leaned forward, and he caught her gently holding her as sobs racked her chest. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to lean on someone, to believe that maybe she was not meant to fight every battle alone. They sat like that until her tears subsided, until the beeping of the machines faded into the background, and all that remained was the sound of their breaths sinking in quiet rhythm. Nathaniel pulled back slightly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "You never have to doubt me again," he said softly. "I will protect you not because I think you are weak, but because I know you deserve to be protected, to be loved without condition." Clara's voice shook as she whispered, "And if I cannot give back what you need, if I fail you?" His smile was small but sure. "Then I will still be here, because love is not about transactions, it is about presence, and I am not going anywhere." Something deep within her uncoiled a tether snapping free. She leaned forward again, this time not from fear, but from choice, and their lips met in a kiss that was both gentle and shattering. It was not desperate or stolen, like the first night they shared. It was a promise tender and certain, born of years of unspoken longing, finally given voice. When they pulled apart, Clara's cheeks were flushed, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." She closed her eyes, nodding, and whispered the words she had been too afraid to say. I want that. I want us. In the days that followed, Clara remained in the hospital to recover, but Nathaniel rarely left her side. He handled business calls from the corner of her room, his presence a constant reassurance. When she was finally discharged, he drove her not to the motel she had been staying in, but to a quiet townhouse he owned on the edge of the city. Just until you are back on your feet, he explained. But the look in his eyes told her he wanted it to be more. Clara hesitated only a moment before stepping inside, the warmth of the space enveloping her like a promise of a new beginning. That night, as she unpacked the small suitcase that held her few belongings, she touched the bracelet on her wrist and smiled through her tears. For the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone. The whispers did not end when Clara left the hospital. If anything, they grew louder. Tabloids caught wind of her connection to Nathaniel, splashing headlines across glossy covers that painted her as the assistant who traded dignity for a billionaire's affection. Rumors swirled through the company corridors, whispered behind hands, and exchanged in knowing glances. Clara tried to hold her head high, but every word cut deep, reopening wounds she thought had begun to heal. Nathaniel watched it all with quiet fury, his patience thinning as the lies mounted. Finally, he summoned his communications team and announced a press conference to address the speculation. The morning of the event, Clara stood in front of the mirror, anxiety twisting her stomach. She wore a simple navy dress Nathaniel had insisted was professional, but true to you. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the hem. What if they never believe me? She whispered. Nathaniel appeared behind her, his reflection steady and grounding. They will believe because they will hear the truth. And even if they do not, I will not let them destroy you. His hand brushed hers, warm and firm, and for the first time she believed him. The atrium of Cross Enterprises was transformed into a media stage. Cameras lined the back reporters, jostling for space microphones thrust forward. Employees gathered at the edges, curiosity mingling with judgment. Clara's pulse raced as Nathaniel stepped up to the podium, commanding silence with his mere presence. He began calmly, his deep voice carrying with clarity. There has been much speculation regarding Clara Hayes and her position within this company. I will speak plainly. Clara is not here because of favoritism or scandal. She is here because she has earned it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel held up the photograph from years ago, the blurred snapshot showing a teenage girl pulling him from the wreckage. Long before she was my employee, Clara was my savior. At 19, I nearly lost my life in a car accident. She risked hers to drag me to safety. I spent years searching for the girl who saved me, and fate brought her back into my life. To imply she used me for advancement is not only false, but an insult to her courage and integrity. The room stilled. Reporters scribbled furiously. Nathaniel's eyes swept the crowd before softening as they found Clara standing off to the side. And yes, he said, his voice lowering with emotion, I love her, not because of obligation, not because of whispers, but because she is the only woman who ever saw me for more than the empire I built. She is my equal, my anchor, and my future. Gasps echoed. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Clara's breath caught tears pricking her eyes as the weight of his confession wrapped around her. He had spoken the words not in a private room, but to the entire world. A reporter shouted a question. "Miss Hayes, do you confirm this? Do you love him?" The microphone was thrust in her direction, the eyes of hundreds turning toward her. Clara's knees wobbled, but Nathaniel extended his hand from the podium steady and unwavering. With a deep breath, Clara walked forward, taking his hand. She faced the crowd, her voice trembling but clear. "Yes, I love him. And I will not apologize for it." The atrium erupted with flashes and shouts. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Nathaniel squeezed her hand, his expression one of pride and fierce devotion. The narrative shifted instantly. Where once there had been suspicion and cruelty, now there was awe at the story of fate, of a girl who had saved a boy, of a woman who had captured the heart of a titan. Employees who had whispered behind her back now looked at her with respect. Even the media, hungry for scandal, could not resist the pull of a romance rooted in destiny. By the end of the day, the headlines had changed. They no longer called her a mistress or opportunist. They called her the woman who saved the billionaire's life and later his heart. Clara sat with Nathaniel in his office afterward, the noise of the day fading as the sun dipped below the skyline. She leaned into him, exhaustion and relief washing through her. "You did not have to tell them everything," she murmured. He kissed her hair gently. "I wanted to. I will never let the world twist our story again. You deserve to be known for the truth." She closed her eyes, letting his words sink deep. For the first time, she felt the chains of shame and doubt break away. For the first time, she believed they could stand together, not in secret or in shadows, but in light. The weeks that followed the press conference unfolded with a surreal gentleness Clara had never imagined possible. For the first time in years, she woke without the weight of shame pressing on her chest. The whispers at the office had quieted, replaced by nods of respect, even admiration. Nathaniel kept his promise, standing at her side through every meeting, every lingering glance, his presence a silent shield. One evening he invited her to a small gathering at his townhouse. Not a grand gala or corporate dinner, but an intimate circle of friends who mattered most to him. The atmosphere was warm, the rooms filled with laughter, the air rich with the scent of home cooking, rather than catered extravagance. Clara felt out of place at first, but when Nathaniel reached for her hand and introduced her as the woman who changed his life, her heart swelled with a belonging she had never known. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the house was quiet, Nathaniel led her out onto the terrace where the city skyline shimmered against the stars. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, his usually steady hands trembling just slightly. "Clara Hayes," he began, his voice soft yet steady. "You have been the reason I breathe easier, the reason I fight harder, the reason I believe in more than empires and numbers. You saved me once when I was just a boy, and you saved me again when I was a man on the brink of losing himself. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that I will never take you for granted?" Clara's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, the man who had been both her torment and her salvation, the man who had stood unyielding through storms, yet knelt before her now in vulnerability. She whispered yes through trembling lips, and he slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. Their kiss sealed the promise of a future built not on secrets, but on truth. Yet as they returned inside hand in hand, Clara's phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up smiling, expecting a congratulatory message, but the smile faded as she read the words glowing on the screen. "This is not over." Her stomach dropped the warmth of the moment, pierced by a chill of dread. She looked at Nathaniel, his arms steady around her, and for the first time realized that while their love had triumphed, their story was only beginning.